Today we'll do some angular momentum problems. Just conceptual questions to help us understand what's going on. Alright, the left figure shows two boys of equal mass standing halfway to the edge on a turntable that is freely rotating at some angular speed omega I. It then walks to the position shown in the right figure. The final speed omega f is greater than or less than or equal to the original speed. So what we want to do is we want to remember that I initial omega initial is going to be I final omega final, or I final is, omega final is I initial over I final times omega I. So what we're really interested in is what's this ratio. So if we think that they're each halfway, then we would say that in this one, I initial is each boy is m times r over 2 quantity squared, but there are two of them. So the total rotational inertia ends up being 1/2 mr squared. In the second case, IF, we have the one at the center contributes nothing, but the one on the end is at a radius r, and it's squared, so that's mr squared. We can see that IF is larger than II, so this number is less than 1, so therefore the whole thing is less. A very low friction merry-go-round, a rotating platform, with a radius of 1.5 meters and moment of inertia of 50 kilogram meter squares, is rotating at 10 revolutions per minute. A child with mass 20 grams initially sits 1 meter from the center and then moves towards the edge of the platform. Two students are discussing how to calculate the final angular velocity of the platform. Arno says, I think we have to use conservation of angular momentum. The distance from the child to the axis of rotation increases, so her moment of inertia increases, the total moment of inertia goes up, and so the angular velocity has to go down. Bell says, well, I agree with the angular velocity goes down, but I think you're going to get the wrong value. We need to use conservation of energy instead of conservation of momentum because there's no collision here. The rotational energy, kinetic energy is going to stay the same here, and as the moment of inertia increases, the angular velocity goes down. Which, if any of these students, do you agree with and think is correct, and why? The student who's correct is Arno. This is a conservation of angular momentum situation because the child exerts no external torque. Right? The child does not torque the disk any. The system child plus platform have to stay constant. And so, since there's no torque exerting, the child's angular momentum will be the same. And as they go further out, the I omega has to be the same, and I has gone up, so omega has to go down. Where did Bell go wrong? Bell used conservation energy, and yet what we know is the child is actually doing work in the system. They're changing potential energy in their muscles into other stuff. We have no reason to think that the total kinetic energy should be the same. And in fact, it will not be the same. As we've mentioned a couple of times, even a point particle moving in a straight line will have angular momentum about any axis you choose, although the value could, of course, be 0. We can see this in a somewhat dramatic fashion by using two hover pucks and making them collide. So we have that over here. A hover puck is just a little puck that has an engine and a fan, so it creates a tiny little hovercraft for, well, a few minutes while the battery runs, and the thing floats basically frictionlessly. So let's see what happens when we collide these. Right, we see that they're originally moving with some linear velocity, and then they end up with rotational velocity. Right, one more time. It turns out that the angular momentum of each thing is r perpendicular times p. That is to say, we take the moment arm for the momentum, just like we had for the force. We can compute a moment arm for momentum by taking a line of action, taking the shortest distance to that line. So, a bullet of mass m is shot at a hinged rod near the end of the rod. The rod was initially at rest and has a moment of inertia I about an axis through its hinge. The bullet is fired at various angles theta to the rod as shown in the top views below, with initial velocity v at a distance d from the hinge. Circle in blue the letters of the situation with the greatest magnitude of angular momentum, and red the situations with the least. So, what we're going to get here is we want to maximize the, right, we're going to say that L is r perpendicular p. They all have the same peak, so they have the same mass and speed, so we want to maximize r. And we know that the maximum case is going to be when we're at right angles, so that's going to be our maximal case. And the worst case would be if we were dead on with no angle, if we're just coming in along the line here. We're not given that case, but we're certainly given something close to it, so it must be that one. If you want to see it drawn out graphically, here are the moment arms after the line of actions for each of the momenta. So here's the momentum, its line of action is this, the shortest distance is this, and then we can play some trig to get the actual values, but it's pretty clear that this is the least and this is the most. A bullet of mass m is shot at a hinged rod and hits the rod distance d from the hinge. The rod was initially at rest and has a moment of inertia I about an axis to the hinge. The bullet is fired at an angle theta to the rod, as shown in the top view, with initial velocity v at a distance d from the hinge. The angular speed of the rod with the bullet embedded right after the collision is omega, and several students are discussing this situation. Anne says the angular momentum of the rod plus bullet about the hinge after the bullet is embedded is the same as the initial angular momentum of the bullet about the hinge. Bella says the kinetic energy of the bullet before the collision with the rod is equal to the rotational kinetic energy of the rod plus the bullet together after the bullet hits the rod. And Carlos says the bullet is going straight, so it does not have an angular momentum about the rod hinge before the collision, so we need to use conservation of energy. However, we can't really compare the energy before and after, since we don't know how much energy is lost in heat, deformation of the ball rod, and so on, and sound. Which do you think is right, and why? Here we should isolate and emphasize what they say that's good and what they say that's wrong. I'm going to start with Carlos. Carlos is totally right that we can't compare energies before and after, since we don't know how much energy is lost in heat and deformation of the bullet and rod and sound. This is, after all, a non-elastic collision, and we know that during non-elastic collisions, some energy is going to be lost to make it not deform, to make it not elastic. So Carlos is totally right about that. On the other hand, Carlos is not correct about this, that the bullet is going straight, so it doesn't have angular momentum. Turns out even particles that are moving along straight lines, and even if they're particles, will have angular momentum based on the moment arm of that line of action from whatever point you're considering the center. So sadly for Carlos, he's out. Bella goes wrong the other way. Bella says the kinetic energy of the bullet before the collision is equal to the rotational kinetic after, but that's not true for the reasons that Carlos said. Some energy is going to be lost to the collision, right? Lost in making the collision non-elastic, and so this is out, which sort of puts us that probably it's Anne who's right, but we should see if we believe it. The angular momentum of the rod plus bullet about the hinge after the bullet is embedded is equal to the same as the angular momentum of the bullet about the hinge, and so we want to say, is that correct or not? Well, it is correct. We should be able to figure out why. We want angular momentum to be conserved, so we want to say there are no external torques. The bullet is stopped by the rod, and the rod is pushed by the bullet, but those are both internal, so they can't change the momentum state of the system at all. There is also a force at the hinge, because the rod does not just skitter off this way, but starts to rotate. But that hinge is at the location of rotation, so it exerts no torque. So it also cannot change the angular momentum of the system. The angular momentum of the system must remain the same. So Anne was, in fact, correct throughout. All right, here we are at the end of a mechanics sequence, at the end of the class, and it's probably worth saying at least once that we've basically created a hierarchy of problem-solving tools in mechanics. These are the things that are of most powerful to least powerful technique. So if you're facing a problem and you don't know what to do, go through this checklist, this hierarchy, and try the top ones as much as you can, and if they can't, it will drive you towards the lower power guys. The reason that I say these are powerful is because they're generally easy to set up, and they either work or fail quickly. So you don't spend a lot of time wasting time on whether they're right or not or being unsure. You can say, oh, this is a situation where it works or a situation where it doesn't. And the most powerful and most common of those is conservation of angular momentum. There are many, many, many systems where there's no net external torque, and so you can do an angular momentum conservation. Obviously, if you have no rotation set up at all, then this is probably not going to be useful, even though it might still be true. But if you can do angular momentum, it will be quick and easy to get an answer. If that one falls apart, then conservation of linear momentum might be useful, especially for instance things that aren't rotating. Then angular momentum might be true but useless. So then you talk about their linear momentum, and that can work out too. That will work whenever the external forces are 0. That happens a fair number of times, and so you get pretty good use of it, and it falls apart really fast. You can just say, oh look, there's an external force, so I'm not even going to bother trying to use this method. Conservation of energy is our last of conservation principles, and it is powerful, but you have to know that energy is conserved. So there are cases, for instance, if it's only gravity and normal forces, or springs and gravity, then you can say, oh, I know those are all conservative forces, so I can conserve energy. But if you don't know that all of your forces are conservative, then you can't use conservation of energy. And it takes a little longer to be sure about that because you have to analyze the forces, so it doesn't fail quite as gracefully as the other two either. If none of those are going to work, then you're going to be in dynamics, in which case, again, torques might be the quickest way to get stuff done. It's the most powerful of dynamics techniques if you can use it and if things can spin. A lot of times things aren't allowed to spin, which means there are counter torques that you can't control that counter the tendency to rotate. So if that happens, you fall down to linear dynamics, which is straight up forces F equals ma. And this is the least powerful, most grungy technique. So we really would rather not use that if one of the other ones would work, even though we know that at root, a force analysis should get you all the way through mechanics without any problem, but it's often really kind of ugly and not easy to do. And then finally, at the end, is kinematics. Kinematics is not very powerful, but has the advantage that almost always it's pretty clear that what's being asked. So it's pretty clear if something's a kinematics problem or not, and if it is, you just jump right to that, and you really don't use the hierarchy at all.